Welcome back to Integral Podcast. And today I'm speaking to somebody who is a very actually inspirational person. And since I'm now in a kind of like the middle-aged white man category, probably, I'm going to say that this is a very inspirational young person and wise young person. But before I go into any sort of definitions of other people, Claire, please tell us, who are you?
The phrasing of that question is so philosophical, but anyways, hi, I'm Claire. I am a business consultant, startup executive, and a musician. That's who I am as a person, and let's just see how it branches from here because I do a lot of things. So.
Yeah, that's cool. Like Integral as a company has gone through a bunch of evolutionary stages and phases, and we're now set on the idea of calling it an applied philosophy company, because one way to describe design is applied philosophy. So philosophy here is very welcome. And if anything, I'm looking to get into understanding your philosophy of life, and also to, as a middle-aged white man,
You're not middle-aged yet.
to actually understand how and what young people are thinking about, especially in the world of work and business and all that kind of stuff. Of course, I'm connected to a bunch of young people, and I'm a father of two young people at their ages of eight-year-old girl or 9-year-old girl now, and a 13-year-old boy. But this particular age of 20 somethings is quite, I feel, both a little bit underrepresented on one hand, and somewhat also perhaps misunderstood or not understood well enough, and but also essential generation, right? Those are like people who have the energy, have the power, and have perhaps ability to drive forward in a new way, in a different way. So what is life like for a 20-something today?
Wow, yeah, this turned very, yeah, that makes sense. Life like for 20 something, I guess I can talk from the general trend of what I am noticing. In terms of like, I like particularly early 20s and mid 20s, you're at that point in life where you're too old to be considered, oh, like you're still, like you're really young, like you're like a teenager or whatever. You're too old to be considered that. But to be considered a real functioning adult, quote unquote, you seem to be still way too young. So you're kind of in that place where it's like, okay, either I need to like go completely one way or completely another way, still trying to figure themselves out, sort of a thing. I do believe that life is all about self-discovery and it is done on a continuous manner. But I feel that when it comes to 20s, that early mid 20s, that's where it really, really intensifies. And I think that's why the whole like quarter life crisis happens fairly often too.
So I remember around the age of 22, I had finished my master's degree, and I was now flying over to Bosnia to get engaged to my, at the time, girlfriend, who I wanted to become my wife, but didn't know whether she was going to subscribe to that idea because, I was like something like 12, 15 grand in debt, no job, kind of, smart ass. But, I thought I was the smartest person in the world, but I had nothing to show for myself. And I was getting married. And, that was my kind of 23 years old, 22. And then at 25, I became a dad. And most people kind of consider me as a kind of crazy guy. But now, I have a niece who's 20 something, and, she's kind of like wondering, oh, what's all this adulting thing and so on. So I see that like 20 something year olds are quite significantly different to even my age. Although I think I was an outlier in many respects, even at my generation. So, what is, at which age do you think 20 somethings consider themselves to be adults?
Maybe towards the end of 20s, because if you're looking at, yeah, I mean, sure, like people are starting to get married later, they're going to school and stuff like that. And then when you, I guess in terms of the in terms of like how soon do you have your life together, like as in like your student loans are paid off, you have a solid job, you have a significant other, or whatever, like whatever standard things that society prescribes onto people through whatever, through like these mass media pictures or whatever it might be. I would say it is those like end of 20s. That's when people are like, okay, I don't, like, I'm not a teenager anymore, and I think I need to, like, I think I really get a hang of this adult quote unquote. So
And so, well,
that's
like,
how I would see it.
how are you dealing with the situation that we're all dealing with? But I know that you're, as you said, even in your introduction, you are a person very much in that sense like me. And I think that's where we get along quite nicely, because we could talk about music, we could talk about system processes, we could talk about philosophy and all that kind of stuff. So how are you managing your multi-talented life experience, and what are you finding as the way forward for yourself, and why?
Way forward for myself and why. I would, because I am living in this day and age, I do have a little bit of easier time, quote unquote, balancing my multiple passions around music, and like when it comes to consulting for companies, and as well as running my own company. But how I do it is through or at least how I try to differentiate myself and how I try to put myself in different hats is literally creating myself those different hats. So if you, like, I know, Jason, you have known me for a while, and you've seen couple of, obviously there's a name Claire, but there's also brands that you have seen from me. That's my way of balancing that, not even, but that's my way of creating these container for these multiple areas of expertise and passions, and that's how I pursue it. If I, let's say for my music brand Whaley, that's where I know, okay, I'm gonna go ahead these aspects of it, and it's all, and I guess we could kind of correlate it to alter ego in a sense as well. Whilst for my startup and whilst for my consulting brand, which is a part of my startup, because my startup is kind of a common ground that ties everything all together. I use whatever that brand's name is, and I know that within this sphere, this is what we're focusing on. So it's almost putting on different outfits. That's how I see it. And then just knowing that, well, it's all within my closet. It's all a part of who I am. It's all a part of how I'm expressing myself. It's just outfits.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually very interesting, because I've even myself gone through that kind of evolutionary process. I remember when I first started in business, I immediately had idea of like 3 or 4 companies I wanted to run. And this is interesting, actually. I wasn't expecting to hear this, but it's how similar there is. I had, because my original company was called FlexiWebs. I still run as that's my actual formal registered name. And then that was FlexiWebs, standing for Flexible Electronic Web-Based Systems. But then I had FlexiFlix, which was around photography, because I was hugely into photography at the time. And I wanted to build something that was like akin to iStock Photo or one of these kind of stock photography websites. And that was way before there was any one of those. And I was pitching around to people, and everyone thought, like, why would you want to buy photos from online? Like, what for? And I said, for flyers, websites, like just about anything and everything, right? And they're like, nah. And then I was giving people like literally 50-50 in on these things. I said, I'll build everything, I'll go and take photos and we'll put it on. It's like, no. And then iStock Photo happened. Then I had another thing called Flexi Mix, which is around music. And I had Flexi Prints, which was around publishing. And but actually never executing on those things. Having said that, now, so 15 years on, we're doing pretty much the same thing, but under quite different brand names. And Integral, being Applied Philosophy Company, is then applying itself to all these different brands that are like sister company brands. So that makes sense to me, because that marries up the idea of specificity and specialization with generosity and integration and holism. And like, I think both have value, both in business as well as in life. So tell me a little bit about what you're working on these days as your core sort of proposition that you see, may grow going forward as a kind of significant thing.
Okay, so what is happening, and it might, like, I'm going to start off as a little bit of a backtrack here, just because you might find this point very interesting. But when I decided that I'm going to be restructuring things quite a bit in terms of the projects that I'm going to be doing, I ended up taking the approach of task force. So within the company that I have, and we're actually in the process of renaming it to a holdings company. And then within that holdings company, that's where we have these different brands, which we consider our task forces. And because I don't know why, I was very military inspired on that regard, but so task forces where we do very specific things. And the task forces that we're specifically focusing on right now is on the music brand Whaley and our consulting brand Upwork. Those two are our focus, and we do have benchmarks as to what task force is going to be coming on next. I'm hoping that within the next couple of years, I do have a task. It would be a task force, except it would have to be registered as a completely different company that's not even a subsidiary. Like the other two, one Allennials at Work, at least, it will be registered as subsidiary very, very soon. We're going through a process for that. But I do want to set up a nonprofit that is that is quite contrast to Allennials at Work, but it's still doing, I guess, similar things, not really, but yeah. So those are my focus. But anyways, two focuses are on the music and the consulting brand. Same old stuff.
So one of the things that has transpired and become absolutely the norm now, and not necessarily through people choosing it to be, but people kind of being forced into it, and which is virtual working, and dare I even say virtual team working, although the notion of team working has barely existed in companies at all, and virtual team working is something that is basically a rarity as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, I'm speaking from a point of where at the age of 22, 23, I had just submitted in a master's degree thesis on managing virtual teams in completely virtual environments back in 2002.
Oh my God.
And so 20 years ago, and I was thinking, and that was at the time when Skype didn't have video feature. It was only audio only. And I wrote something that I had, that Skype was like Zoom at the time. It was pretty much like the only sort of calling tool other than telephone. And maybe mobiles were around, but those like Nokia,
I
yeah, it's like you couldn't even be bothered to change the ringtone because it was too much hassle. uh, and So I wrote something like this as a sentence in that thesis, and I wrote in the sort of concluding statement. I said, as soon as Skype has video features, we're all going to be working from home and not going to offices anymore. And it took Skype another 2 years to develop video feature, if I recall my history correctly. But the point is that now everyone's having to work virtually, but the 20 somethings have grown up more or less in digital first world. And so like what I do notice is that certainly with my 13-year-old son and so on, they just kind of like take to the digital stuff as like ducks take to water.
Yeah.
But they don't necessarily use it in the right way. Mm-hmm. So what do you see as kind of patterns and anti-patterns of young people using technology, and perhaps using technology for business and some sort of creative, productive purposes?
Well, okay, so I guess anti-pattern is, so just to clarify, that means any outlying behaviors, right?
So behaviors that would be like not productive or derogatory or detrimental to what they really are looking for in life.
Okay, that makes sense.
Something like, if you're just constantly on Twitter posting bullshit memes for no reason, that would be like an anti-pattern of use. Unless you're some sort of, I suppose, social media guru who is looking to grow a whole bunch of channels for some sort of, strategic reason. But, yeah.
Here's my perspective on this, and I feel, and I mean, even though you might disagree, but in terms of like what's productive or whatever, like why are we imposing that definition when technology and these digital tools, they're just tools. Like I've seen, for example, like I've seen people use Zoom for these major conference meetings in schools, but I've also seen people use Zoom for adult entertainment stuff. And in our, like, I mean, maybe for one person that might be considered that's unproductive, whatever, that's like weird use of Zoom or whatever, but some person it might be okay with that. And I guess what I am trying to get with is what these digital tools that are available. These are just tools. Like it's not meant to be good or bad. It's what we make of it. And that means that, yeah, sure, the more common use as to how people are going to be using it is on social media, and that, like, on how to communicate, because that's just a part of human behavior. That's what we're wired to do, just connect and communicate. And I mean, when it comes to posting BS memes and stuff like that, well, like, what if that's their way of communicating? What if that's all just part of their journey? So that's why I know that's deviating from the question quite a bit, but but I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make. It's like it's nothing good or bad, and they're, no matter what, they're just going to use it for like a way to express themselves and connect with someone and communicate, and it's just going to be what they make of it. And it could, like, and then it could be completely accidental. They might have come across one thing, and a couple of months down the road, like, even though you might feeling that initially they might just be fiddling around, let's say a little bit after, turns out that platform goes viral, and boom, they're making a lot of money from it. So it really depends on measures that we're going to be putting them up against. I hope this made sense, even though I really deviated away from the question quite a bit.
No, you didn't really deviate, but there's bits there that didn't make sense. I'd say, the adult person using Zoom for adult purposes is it's a pattern because they're likely making money from it. So, if they're like an adult star or whatever, and
They
they're
might
making
not
money.
even be, though. They might just be doing it for shizzles.
Okay.
And that's okay. So,
Okay.
I mean, I guess if we're looking in terms of are they going to make money from this, then yeah, we can definitely say, oh, yeah, this is like not going to lead to money. This is going to, but you never know what's going to be happening. Like
Yeah.
for all someone that's like that's using Zoom for quite inappropriate shizzles, they go viral in a part of the internet that we're not even going to get to in this podcast, and they somehow end up making a lot of money. Are we gonna go up to them and say, no, you're being unproductive, like you weren't using it in a strategic manner? No, it's just like if the life turned out that way, right?
Okay, so I think this is the thing you've now hit on a certain vein here, which is
Yeah.
that at the age of 39,
Mm-hmm.
I've lost an element of that experimenting with stuff, and you use the word which I never use, shizzles, right? Even that word, it just kind of brought a smile to my face, because it's like, what does that even mean, right? But it doesn't matter, right?
Oh, it's a replacement for S word. I just didn't want your
Yeah,
podcast.
but no, but it's like we can say shit, it's okay, but it like, what I'm saying is that there's a sort of micro moment there that could spring off an entire direction of exploration of ideas because of just that word. Okay. But that word is like an example of and the whole thing that you just spoke about, which is using technology for, like, kind of, in a sense, misusing it, in the sense of it wasn't designed for that, but you can use it for this too, right?
Yeah, you can use it for anything. Like you can use it for anything, really.
Yeah, so that's the aspect that I've somewhat lost as a sort of practice in my life. Going, I don't know, like, I've got a nail file here. What else could I use it for other than filing my nails, right? And perhaps if somebody else starts using it for something else, perhaps for me to stop telling them, don't use nail file for not nail filing. I more like explore and see why they're using it for something else. Okay. And what opportunity that might actually present to creating perhaps a different tool for, I don't know, opening envelopes or things like that. So it's that you've just said something very, very significant without perhaps knowing that you did. Okay. And so this is the other thing now. This is actually springing up another very, very important thing. It's almost like there's a kind of divider line here on Zoom, right, between my video and your video. But there's also like an invisible divider line between our generations. Okay. It's almost like, this is one reality here, and that's another reality there. Like, how do we create this cross-generational synergy? That's the question. I just got bounced out. I think it was my internet. Yeah. Okay. So let me re-ask that question. So there's something very important here that's happening in Zoom. We're sitting. I'm sitting here in my sort of virtual reality, and you're sitting there, and there is a line between our videos, and that line is a sort of separation line, but not just between our virtual realities, but also between our generations. And the question here is, how do we create a synergistic cross pollination between young people and middle-aged people and older people? Like, tell me, give me some clues, insights here, and inspiration.
What's coming up on in my head is it's all about our perception and the thoughts that create what they create this construct of how things are, like how we believe things are supposed to be, things are not supposed to be, and so on. And when it comes to that divide between the different generations, I do have to wonder, sure, we talk about this divide, but have we ever thought about what we have in common? Have we ever thought about, like, what do we have in common? What, why is that? Label use a label as a tool to kind of project what the things that they might be thinking of, what elements or what circumstances have contributed to who they are as, like, what they are today, but don't make it define. Don't make it define who they are, dualize them. And I feel that's kind of the key if I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do we eliminate that generational divide? It's all in our heads. And that's going to be the easiest, but that's also going to be the hardest.
So what I notice, and this is going a little bit into even younger generation of, my son, and we used to do this, when we're teenagers, which is to want to be different from our parents, right? So what my 13-year-old son is doing is he's consciously trying to differentiate himself from me, and he is applying a form of kind of rejection tactics to say and to show that he disagrees with things that I say, mm-hmm. just so that he can differentiate himself. That's how I experience it, even though it makes sense as a sort of like wisdom of all ages. Mm-hmm. He would say that's just a boomer thing, right?
Yeah, so, the whole hashtag okay boomer.
Yeah, exactly. So we even started a podcast at one point called Boomer versus Zoomer to try and bridge this gap that's kind of being created both kind of consciously and unconsciously and through some sort of, God knows what, like intergenerational dynamics, right? Where he wants to carve out his own personality with perhaps different suits, as you said, to wear. And the way for him to do that is to differentiate away from me, however right I may be, right? Mm-hmm. He doesn't necessarily want to talk about the same things that I talk about. So that's the thing that's pretty interesting. And then, so when you bring that sort of thing into corporate environments and you see young people who are just like, for them, it's like a natural thing to just kind of go up, like, I might be speaking to you and listening to you, but I might also be surfing my phone, right? And that's not necessarily seen as rude, right? Mm-hmm. In younger generations, whereas in older generations, they'll be like, well, that's borderline, you should be fired from work, right? How dare you do that in my, presence, What is the phone more important to you? And the answer might be that it is. So, these are the kind of, some of these kind of etiquette things that also exist. that also then play themselves out into virtual spaces. So, for example, one of the kind of famous things being that like older generations might use proper punctuation and put full stops at the end of a word in chats, and younger generations see that as rude and off-putting and harsh.
Mhm.
Yeah. So if I write sure full stop, that's like sure, as opposed to sure. Talk to me more about that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, that's a lot of points that you brought up. I guess to start from the younger like your example of your children trying to like deviate away and stuff like that. I think a part of, I mean, yeah, it's their way of trying to find individuality, but they don't know exactly how to best go about doing it. But also, it could be on their sense of, oh, they're never gonna get it. But I think that's something very universal, for not really universal, but it happens to a lot more people than you think. Even if your family is like the most supportive, there's gonna be like nobody understands me sort of a thing, and I feel all humans have that. It's just that really intensifies throughout your teenage years. So I think that could be one of that. It's like, oh yeah, they're not gonna get it anyway, so whatever. Okay, so that part is done. And as for like these etiquettes, punctuations and stuff like that, well, I guess it's like the part of it's like like the cultural norm aspect of it, and more so in that socio-cultural norm aspect of things. When you're looking at younger generation at the dinner table, or like really anywhere, even if they're having breakup conversation, it's not exactly like completely rude, quote unquote, for you to like, wait. It's like, yo, my mom called me. Hello. Like, it's not like, so it is very common behavior to say, oh wait, I'm gonna check my phone for this, and it's like the devices that like older generations are used to, like watches and stuff, like watches or like compass or maps and stuff like that. It's all in here. It's all on the phone. And with that being said, it's just what they're used to. And in the workplace situation, yeah, sure, they're going to learn. I think that as like with the workplaces, no matter whether it's virtual, remote, or whatever it might be, there is always going to be that professional conduct behavior. So that's going to be that. As for communicating, again, it's communicating sure dots versus sure what do you have in mind, and not really using much periods or like dots or like whatever it might be. Again, it's like like it's sociocultural norm as to how they're used to communicating. I am not really used, I mean, as a younger millennial, I'm not exactly used to like just bulls and his blah blah blah. Like I am used to like using periods, exclamation marks, italics, bolds, and stuff like that with then even in a formal email. And I almost use it, like I almost use it as a way to be like, okay, like this is like ways to add a little bit more dimension as to here's what I'm trying to communicate, here's the point that I'm trying to emphasize, here's the point that I'm trying to not emphasize. Whilst someone younger than me, which yeah, that's why I say I'm getting really, I think I'm starting to get old. But when you're looking at younger Gen Z or like teenagers that are growing up, you know what, they might like, when like, let's say you send a huge sentence and their response might literally be like photo of some like guy, and it's literally, and then it has a caption of okay boomer.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could be that, and it's just how they communicate, or it's how they're used to seeing communications being done. And you know what, maybe even down the road, like it's like the 5-year-olds nowadays, give them a few years and next thing you know, how they're communicating through is some like 15-second TikTok video message of them being like, it's like, here's what I want for you. And then there's a caption. Here's what I want for groceries. Dot, 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 with the fonts and stuff. Like maybe that's how they end up communicating. So yeah. Again, I feel like I keep deviating from the question.
No, it's
But
not. You're not deviating from the question, because this is precisely the thing. I'll give you an example of a startup I briefly worked with a couple of years ago. They were being incubated in Microsoft Accelerator here in London. So they'd gotten like hired or selected for Microsoft Accelerator and got some funding, and then a whole bunch of people were looking at them. And the startup was notionally, I can't remember the name and so on, but notionally they were doing this thing, which was a video chat app that was about sending video snippets and responding with video snippets. An example they gave was like, I don't know, grandchildren want to catch up with grandma, and they send grandma a video, short video. Hi, grandma, how are you doing? Blah, 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 blah. And grandma, instead of having to type and all that stuff, she can just press a button and respond with video. And that becomes more of a kind of almost like a forum-like thing where you can then reply to individual video messages, have a kind of threaded conversation, and those can then become things that can be had as more public conversations for sports fans to respond and reply to video snippets from, let's say, famous sports stars and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought this is great. Right. And the guy who was running the startup was 30 something. Right. And I said to him, you know, what is, and he was sort of like had pretty sort of strong views on what the product should have. And I'm coming in there as a UX designer or advisor, designer / strategist. And I asked him, you know, why do you want these features in the product? And he goes, because that's what's really needed. And I said, you know, how do you use the product yourself? And he goes, oh, I don't. I said, why don't you use the product? He goes, I don't use social media.
And why are you making social media?
Yeah. So that's where, and he sort of made a very strong pitch to me, which made no sense, but he was super convinced that social media is a waste of time, and you know he doesn't want to kind of participate in it. Had all sorts of privacy concerns around it and so on. Yet he was in Microsoft Accelerator building what was a kind of some sort of like TikTok chat app type thing. I don't know. And I was like, this makes no sense. But he seemed not to see that generational gap at all, and that he was effectively just completely disconnected while trying to make a communication / connection tool. Okay. And it's like, you know, this, I see this quite a bit because a lot of business owners, especially the older ones that don't really understand the nature of digital world, they kind of go like, I'm just going to give my people, whoever works for me, the quote unquote permission to innovate or whatever, right? And let them build stuff. And I'm just going to kind of live in my little secluded mansion somewhere that isn't even online properly, right? And I'm literally seeing here in UK situations where the chief investor gets his emails printed by his secretary. He doesn't send emails, literally. And it's like he's invested into a e-commerce startup. So this is the kind of, you know, this is true boomers, okay, who's still wielding billions around. I mean, you can take like Warren Buffett. He's got $147 billion, right, that he's sitting on in cash. And he says, I don't know what to deploy it into. He has some stake in Apple, but it's like, would you know what to deploy $147 billion? At least half of that, would you know what to deploy it into?
I mean, at that point, you got like at that point, it's not. I mean, you could do nothing with it, and money will still grow.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, the thing
point,
is here, it's like, would you put that money into digital businesses or would you put it in some sort of physical businesses?
I would personally, like at that point, and this is where, again, I feel like I'm totally deviating from the answers that you might be expecting here, but Um, I will be putting that into the long-term legacy. So I will be putting that into lobbying for policies. I will be putting that into education and things like that. Sure, these are, yeah, it's not going to be overnight thing. It's not going to be it's not going to be as thrilling as looking at the stock market and seeing the stocks go up and being like, oh, I invested 100 million and it went to 500 million. It's awesome. It's not going to be like that. But what is going to be doing what is that it is going to be shizzle disturbing as the time goes on. So like you advocate for, let's say, a huge policy around cutting out plastics per se, and let's say you develop a technology around that as like a byproduct or something. That could be one of the things. So that might disrupt the manufacturing industry quite a bit, but that also means birth of other industries. Or let's say a bunch of people in developing countries that weren't able to go to school before are now able to graduate high school, and they start running for politics, or they start going to universities and the country starts growing. So that's how I would be using it if I'm at that point. It's around those long-term legacy building, although how I would love to like to call it is like shit disturbing.
Yeah. And so, but
Mhm.
like they say, for example, original something like 1 or 2,000 employees of Google are all like serious multimillionaires, right? Because they had the initial shares and, you know, options on Google and so on. And when Google went public, all these people ended up buying massive mansions and so on. So if Warren Buffett threw a few billion, let's say 5 billion, spread bet into startups, one or two of which could have turned into Google, right? He would have turned 5 billion easily into hundreds of billions in next 5 to 6 years. But meanwhile, he's choosing to sit on 150 billion because he doesn't know technology, doesn't know digital. He is completely devoid from your generation. He's completely devoid from even understanding the word shizzle. He would just kind of go, "What's that mean? Like what?" We would just kind of, who knows? Like, you know, it's this is an issue. This is the issue that we're having in today's society. There's a huge gap in understanding and huge gap of money trickling down into what are really emerging potentialities that the people who are sitting on big money simply have absolutely no awareness of.
Mhm. Yeah, that's like, and that's something that I do say here and there. When people are like, "I need a business idea," I'm like, if you want something that is surefire, but I know you're gonna say no to this, is on as a young person, create something that is going to bridge the gap between these rapidly evolving technologies to old people, because old people, they're not gonna, I mean, yeah, they have their own things and they don't really have an incentive to learn how to use Instagram, so they don't use that. So if you were to go completely analog and you're saying, okay, so here I know that like your grandchildren are talking about this and you find it stupid, I get that, so here is something for you to do so that you can kind of see like whether they are dating that weird neighbor, but at the same time it's completely distraction free for you. So like optimize it for the older people's needs. Older people care. If you're so that's like that's what I bring up quite a bit. But I think something there that's also there is I guess and I was talking about this quite recently. It's on the like skills gap that comes from these like advanced technological like technology advancement things, where yeah, sure, let's say if you are growing up in UK, yeah, you probably have access to cell phones and stuff like that, but you might be in a developing country where you still don't. It might be, and it's like you don't really get that time to catch up and stuff like that. Or maybe you are, and like maybe you fall behind in somewhere or another because everything is evolving so quickly. It's so easy to fall behind. So that's something that I also wanted to address there as well. So that's why I'm like, hey, those are surefire, like areas that need help, whether older people trying to enjoy last 2 decades of their life, without having to learn how to do TikTok and like trying to learn how to do the throwback dance or whatever, or people that don't know technology and that need help keeping up. Those are two needed areas, except those are the areas that people don't go into because, I mean, for younger generation that understand, like, why stop, like, why, like, put yourself on a little bit of a hold and then try to figure out how to go backwards. So that's something I wanted to bring up.
So it's interesting because we are even like really talking in different languages, right? Even our styles of communication are quite different. You know, like let's say in the last 5+ years, I've spent enormous amount of time learning and teaching myself how to make a point and close it. Right? Whereas I see with younger generation, it's not about closing things, it's about opening, right? And that's quite important. Opening is extremely important because you want to have thousands of ideas to then narrow down to 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 that might work. So there's those kind of waves as well that are happening. And so like I've consciously, and I notice this as I'm getting older, I'm consciously choosing to avoid certain types of technology because it's like, that's not for me, right? That's the thinking. That's not for me. Like TikTok is not for me. That's a sort of belief that's sitting there. And I've sort of used it a few times and I kind of go, that's not for me. But I haven't thought about like, how could this be for me, right? So that's another thing that's very interesting to observe. And vice versa, I also notice it that certain older and well-established technologies, such as, let's say, email, the younger generation is like, that's not for me. That's the boomer stuff, right?
I love emails. Like I personally don't use for example, if someone calls me, I just say, don't call me. I'm not gonna answer unless you specifically let me know a little bit beforehand. This is when you're gonna be calling me. And I haven't set up my voicemail in freaking ages. I'm actually gonna do that this weekend. But
Congratulations.
whatever it might be. So yeah, a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I can't believe young people are shutting down email still. I get that it is complicated, but
so,
not really complicated.
There's like for each one of these remarks that I'm making, I've got practical, examples. Again, going back to, my 13-year-old son who's like constantly, walks around with the smartphone. And of course he's got email on there, but he doesn't check it. Like he's on Snapchat, on WhatsApp or whatever, right? All the time. But it doesn't check email. And so we just kind of opened his bank account, okay? And one of the things that there is, like when you open a bank account, there's like an email verification thing that kind of stops the whole flow of opening bank account because you go click the, follow the procedure, etc. And it's not even like, doesn't even cross his mind that relatively modern digital technologies such as digital banking, right? Still requires those kind of flows and validations and so on. So I was like, why is this like bank account not opening? I was like waiting because I assumed that he had followed through the email validation process, but he didn't even check his email. And I was like, Ernie, your email, like you haven't checked your email. I haven't clicked the link to activate. So no wonder the bank opening process is stalled, right? And over time, those things end up being kind of, outdated, so like if you haven't activated your account for 7 to 10 days, then they kind of just shut down the whole application process, right? So I was like, dude, man, what are you doing? And I was like, doesn't care, right? Because it's not in his psyche that is something that would ever be required.
Yeah, exactly. I know that when I was going through schooling system, I don't know why when it comes to emails, I've always been that weirdo. Okay, Alexa. I have had schools set up emails for us, like in like junior high, elementary school, or high school, or whatever it might be, and there's like the student email. And I remember literally, I haven't gotten a single email throughout any school years. Okay, maybe I got like two throughout my
Yeah.
whole entire like K to 12 or whatever it might be, but I was still the oddball checking it on a pretty regular basis because I just do it. So for me, it's a replacement of a physical mail, but I definitely do agree on the sentiment of, yeah, clearly younger people, the younger they are, like it's not in the psyche as to like, do I need to check my email? And like at least until they get to as like a point where they're starting to apply for jobs, because you're not going to send a 15-second video resume to your potential employer. That would be great though. I just got an idea.
Fantastic. What do you see on the horizon? For example, name me perhaps one or two types of technologies that you see as useful for humanity to emerge, going forward, and why?
Oh my god. Wow, that's a really heavy question. Oh man.
Hey, it's an applied philosophy podcast.
I think this was my like most favorite interview that I've done like ever. I don't know about my responses, but I love the questions. So
Because
I would
let's
say
say
some sort
you've got things like TikTok. You've got
of
things. So let's say you've got things like TikTok are are powerful tools, but I'm not sure in what way they are productive tools. So you might have like powerful tools, but then you got productive powerful tools. I don't know. Like I wonder even how you think about this stuff.
I mean, well, like TikTok is, I mean, like the reason why people are starting to pay attention to it is because it's just what a flock of younger generation are going towards. Like that's what people are paying attention to it. As for productive and powerful tools, so I would say I don't even have a name for this, but of some sort of AI thing where it helps you to kind of figure your life out. That will be a really, really helpful technology. Like almost like a life simulator, in terms of like, or at least like career trajectory where you pump in that you're good at, like, and then based on like whatever events that happened in your life and stuff like that, what things would you be good at, what things would you not be good at, blah 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 blah. So I think that'll be really helpful. That's going to save a lot of money that is going in from people doing second degrees because they are not happy with their career choices or whatever it might be. The other thing that will be helpful is some sort of like some sort of a some sort of a translator tool where not like language translation, but translating the technology or translating these socio-cultural norms that are going on, whether this is older generation that is like, I don't know why my grandson is on the phone all the time, what's even on this thing anyways, and like, so some sort of tool that explains that, like, here's why they're on that thing. And well, like, or maybe they're in a developing country and they haven't seen these technologies before, but they, because of this particular piece of tool or whatever, they're able to kind of catch up on it, even at least in terms of having an idea of it, even they might not have used it before. So I feel those kind of tools, again, I don't even have a name for it, I don't even know if that exists, but those tools will be really powerful if there was one.
Yeah, so you're basically talking about what is an emergent field of trans tech, transformational technology, and you know, it's to do with mind and self optimization and all these kind of predictive things and analytics for self understanding, and then transforming in the direction that you want it to go, as opposed to that sort of life takes it in, sort of like what is like self-determined conscious evolution, right? Where like humans have been basically guiding evolution of themselves for quite some time now, but that's been quite a bit of like a hit and miss process, and we're now looking to make that a lot more hit process as opposed to miss. So,
There's a like, there's some like web novel that I'm reading by some like random author that nobody would ever recognize. I just came across it, and they have a very interesting concept where the main character, so they look at their phone one day and they find this app, and it's pretty much this app works on a basis where they collect a bunch of data, and then when you ask the app, is this the right choice, they tell you in percentage as to whether this is the right choice or not, based on the data and based on the AI. And over time, they're able to suggest the possible choices and possible scenarios to eliminate that problem solving, or like the problem solving and decision making process. I found that very interesting. I do see maybe it eventually emerging, but like, I don't know.
yeah,
I guess.
so philosophically, what ends up happening with these kind of tools, and this is a sort of one of those paradoxes of universe that seems to always get chucked at us, is that if everyone and when everyone uses these kind of tools, they tend to sort of converge everyone towards one thing, typically, right? And then in that convergence, what happens is too much of sameness, like everyone battling for the same kind of opportunity, right? And so that's what happens if people are using, let's say, AI bots for stock market picking and so on. Eventually, you realize if everyone was using that, then everyone would be sort of betting on winning tickets, so to speak, winning shares. And what that would do is it would really kind of destroy the market, because everyone would be in a whole bunch of just like small
Yeah,
shares, you know,
exactly. That's
that are all going
another
like
like
this, and everything else is
debate
just kind
on
of
a
tanking
whole
down.
as
Yeah.
to what would happen to the world when these like when these technologies were to ever merge and go really, really far to the point where it completely takes away humans' problem solving ability and decision making.
And so
Like,
we come here back to the word shizzle, because in that predictive analytics, like the people who are thinking that predictive analytics can guide us into the sort of nirvana, right? Actually, actually sort of miss out on the fact that the shizzle is missing in that process. You kind of like, you know, if you took every single step that was perfectly aligned with some sort of vision and mission and whatever, you know, that life would be dull, boring, um, overly predictable,
mhm.
okay, and you as a person would most likely just end up kind of just going, who cares, right? You wouldn't actually care about it because you'd say, well, actually, they can't go wrong, right? It can only go right. And the fact that things can go wrong actually drives you forward because you're like always a bit like, hold on a second, I don't want it to go wrong and I want to make it right. So I'm kind of driven forward to evolve myself and so on. So it's a kind of weird thing. And that's why I think it's important to actually see what comes from the younger generation, right? And really listen. And that's what I've been trying to do here, really listen to you and your kind of unorthodox way of describing and explaining things and really understand what you're saying. Uh, and
What
so,
do you mean unorthodox?
well, look, so I would say what I've been honing on to trying to do, and I think I've done that quite a bit over the last bunch of years, and I kind of want to do more of that, is to say, because often in my mind, there's like a million things going on, and I'm trying to cross connect it into one point to make, right?
Oh, yeah.
To do that is very hard because you're doing it on the fly. You're kind of thinking about 7 different things and saying, what's the common thread? And by the time you string up words to explain it, it could be like 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
and people lose interest. And so now we live in the age of TikTok where it's like you've got whatever 7-10 seconds to make your point, right? So I went as far as registering first trademark, which is called Super Simple Stories, which is about reducing everything down to like punchline type statements that state something of truth, which people can then inquire about what's behind that. Okay. But the punchline statement, the super simple 3 words statement, is there to kind of just encapsulate that core essence. And then if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, you can, but a lot of people won't want to. They'll just kind of remember that super simple story. So, you know, you're still in that phase where you're just kind of exploring all sorts of potentialities across these different intelligences and cognitive faculties. And you're just very happy and comfortable to just speak your mind in that way.
Funny enough, like that's what happens in conversations, but in writing, I guess maybe that's why I have a little bit of hard time with writing, even though people seem to think that I have a lot easier time with writing. They'll say, "Oh, like if you want, you can write this." I'm like, "Oh no, I don't. I really don't."
So one of the things that I've learned to do as part of sort of managing that sort of, gosh, because I remember I was writing blogs back in the day when it was still like dial-up internet. And with every blog post, I wanted to describe finitely how the world works in one blog post. And I was always going for that, shooting for that, and realized I'm not saying anything. Like I'm going for this like a masterpiece and not saying anything every time I do that. So I realized that the masterpiece is actually constructed out of thousands of micro stories. And so I just commit to those micro stories that might be 2 to 5 minutes, and I keep doing them and doing them and doing them and doing them. And there is an overarching philosophy that they should all fit into like a tapestry of storytelling. And each one has got a nugget of value that if people are willing to watch them all, they could like reconstruct how I'm thinking, my entire philosophy. But people will go through that in whatever way they want. And they might see out of 1,000 videos that I record, they might see 10, but they'll pick the ones that resonate with them the most, right? And so that is sort of like a neural network way of thinking, I suppose, which is a lot more applicable to today's world than some old school kind of command and control type thing where one guy knows it all and everyone else has to listen.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So listen, where can people find out more about you and what you do and so on?
I am actually gonna give a link to my personal portfolio website, quote unquote. So it is I am Claire.me.
Hmm.
And that, and depending on how you want to be going about, then it's going to show you a few different options as to what's going to be most applicable, because I'm not going to give like my HR consulting website if you are someone that's not interested in it at all. So
Sure.
I don't exactly know the audience for this podcast yet, as well as I should. So yeah, that's that. I am Claire.me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. And it's been wonderful speaking to you in this kind of uh, different way to what I usually do. But that was the whole point. I wanted to do something different. Thank you.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you.